Hello and welcome to Jerry's Live. My name is Michaela Wester and I am your host today. So today we are talking about skin tone and colored pencils. For our teacher's cart, today's class code is JL335. Type that into JerrysArtarama.com and it'll take you straight to our teacher's cart that has everything that we are using tonight. Let's go ahead and get started. I do have this drawing here that I started prior. That's kind of our example of kind of showing how I did my process. And I'm going to kind of show from start to finish how I chose my supplies and my colors to create these really smooth and soft skin tones. So to start off, I always want to try and test out my materials. So I wanted to test out the paper. I knew I wanted to use my beautiful Cezanne pencils. And I decided that the Bristol, the Soho Bristol paper, is absolutely perfect. It goes on so smooth. And it's also easy to kind of lift up with erasers, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So this was my sample drawing here that I kind of tested out the materials and how they blended. And then I also kind of tested out a few different things. So I have 3 different models here, 3 different skin tones, and they all have something a little bit unique about them. So I have a lighter skin tone, a medium value, and a darker value, and they all kind of have different undertones and different colors to them. So I kind of broke things down how I do my colored pencil process. So I start by laying out my line work, and then I go in with some base colors. Once I have the whole paper kind of filled with some type of base color, I'll go in and I'll optically blend into a more exact color to my reference photo. Once I have my optical blending, I'll jump in and I will burnish my colors to bring out that saturation. And I'll add in my highlights last and touch up the value. Now, how I chose my colors, I kind of created this fun little tool here. It's just printer paper that I folded in half, cut out tiny little squares and rectangles so that when I open it up I have these tiny little viewfinders. And I will use this on my reference photo to kind of figure out what color I'm looking at each specific spot. And you can make them different sizes. I like the really tiny hole for finding very tiny spaces of color. But I find this very helpful, especially if you're trying to figure out what color you want to use and how to pick the colored pencils that you have. Now, it's kind of fun to pick the colors, especially with this Cezanne colored pencil set, because I have the set of 120 colors. And right now they are laid out in the Cezanne colored pencil roll-up. So I have all of the colors on display, and it's super easy to kind of take and grab it, roll it up, and take it with you somewhere else. There's 3 different sizes. We have the 120, which I have laid out here. We have 72 pencil set, and then this one is our 48 set. And I also really like that they have these little like tucked in flaps here to protect your points of your pencils. There's also a little zipper here that I can hide my erasers in. And it's super easy to roll up and take with you. I love these. Alright. Now I am going to kind of walk you through this final drawing here. I kind of broke up the drawing similar to how I practiced these other samples here. And I split up my drawing into each step that I have here. So I'll kind of start at the top here where I place in those base colors. I'll add in my optical blending here, I'll burnish here, and I'll show you those highlights that I pull out at the end. So let me make some space here and we'll jump right in. Sounded kind of country. Alright. So,
settling in the South real well.
Say what?
Settling into the South real well.
I know. Alright. So here's my reference photo here. I wanted 2 different valued skin tones so I can kind of show the variation there. And then I also have, I like having a separate piece of paper off to the side where I kind of keep track of the colors that I'm using. And I also use it for when I start burnishing and I pick up color with my colorless blender, I clean it off on this extra piece of paper. You can also use it to test out your color mixing. Super handy to have something on the side here. So this first lane of colors that I have here is going to be for my lovely lady on the left. So we're going to start with her. And I'll pull out my colors. Starting with that first layer, I start really light. Not only am I adding very light pressure, I'm also starting with very light colors. We have a question?
Yes, we have a question on YouTube that they wanted to know, would watercolor pencils work the same?
In which way?
I would assume in the way that you're about to layer them.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I don't know how they would react afterwards adding water. I would assume that you would see that colorful blending like you would when you use those colorless blender pencils. But I can definitely test that out and see how it works in comparison. So I started off with these 4 colors. And the reason I chose these 4 colors is I looked at my reference photo here using this handy dandy viewfinder. I kind of look at the highlight, the shadow, somewhere in between, and anywhere else that there's a change in color. So for her, the only change in color that I can see is her lips. Her lips are a slightly different color than the rest of her skin. So I will use this little viewfinder and I'll go to my highlight area. And granted, of course, I don't have that perfect brown, but I want to start with what I see as the lightest tone in this highlight. And I'm going to go for a really light yellow to kind of lay that base color. Then I went to my shadows, did the same thing, and I was seeing some reddish purple in that area, so I'm going to use that for a majority of my shadows. I also have 2 complementary colors. Granted, they're not perfect complements, but they're going to be cool tones that kind of cool down any area in between. So when I was looking at her jawline here, I saw a lot more blue and green than I did anywhere else in her face. So I wanted to make sure that I laid that down first as well. So this is like my base colors that are underneath that main mother color. So I went in and I used quite a bit of this lovely purple color, but I'm going to start with my lightest color first. This is also the color that I did my sketch in, which you might not be able to see. It's very light. If you are doing a sketch, use a very light color and don't press down too hard because you can wax out, which means you won't be able to lay down any more color on top. So you could lay down your sketch really dark and kind of burnish that color in, and then you won't really be able to have any color sit on top of that. I do have a fix for that if you do something like that, and I'll talk about that later. So I go in with my very light color first, and I focus on the highlights, putting very light pressure I also like to kind of create a circle-y pattern. Mine's kind of oval-y. The lighter color, you're not going to see those marks as much. The darker colors, you want to make sure you have that kind of even texture and line work when you lay that color in. I know it's very hard to see this yellow in here, but I'm just kind of finding those highlights and kind of blocking them in with some color. And you'll kind of see, maybe, once I start adding in those darker colors, that yellow kind of blends in. It kind of disappears because there's so much more contrast. You don't see it as much, but that's what that layering and building up those colors is going to help with. So I'm now going to go in with some greens. This is going to be where I find those spots of color that are not fully red or orange in that realm. This is where I want to kind of tone those reds and oranges down. So I'm very lightly adding this in those areas. And in this little sliver of her face, I don't see too much. But I always like to make sure that in every spot of the face, there's always going to be at least 2 colors, so that there's always going to be some type of optical blending all over the face. I'm going to jump in with my blues, and I really mostly used this blue for that, the white part of the eye. I always like to have that white part be slightly blue or purple, maybe a little bit of pink or a brown, depends on who you're drawing. But I am going to use this in the forehead just to kind of start some of those darker shadows. And I'm just continuing looking at my reference photo as I lay these down. And then I used this purple, like I said, for a majority of her skin tone. This is kind of what I chose as her main skin color. I know she has a lot of oranges in there, but that's something I layered on top of this, because that's not a perfect orange. It's going to be more of a brown, so I want to mix that with another color that's going to kind of bring it towards a brown, but still keep it nice and warm. So I kind of went in with this all over the place, and now that I have this darker color, you can kind of see those lines as I start filling that in. You want to either cross-hatch or use very light circles so that you don't see that line work, unless of course you want to see those lines. And I'm just very slowly building in this color. I want to make sure that I'm overlapping some of my other colors, unless it's a pure color from what I've put down first, if that makes sense. So if I have a pure light yellow section, a very bright highlight, I'm not going to put this on top of that. And another thing, I am using very light pressure because I want very light color. And once I burnish using this colorless blender pencil, that's going to be when I start seeing that bright saturated color. So for that technique, you want to make sure that you're using lightly colored pencils for your highlights and dark colored pencils for your shadows. So even though that this color right now is very light, once I burnish it, it will be a lot closer to this color. So you want to be careful that you don't put dark valued colors on your highlights unless you put very little. Just be very mindful of that in particular. And I always like to do the hair and the eyebrows last and get all of the fun stuff out of the way. But for eyebrows, I do like to shade them in a skin color first and then add on that hair color on top so that it has a little bit of a shadow-like effect underneath those hairs. So I'm going to fill that in with some of that purple. And then for the shadows, since I already have that blue on there and I'm adding this purple on top, I'm already layering colors. I'm now going to start pressing down just a little bit more so I can see the difference, see where those shadows are laying. And I'm curious, how many people are colored pencil artists? Who watching is a pencil aficionado? Alright. So I kind of brought it almost to the same level as what I have here. And so that's going to be where this ends up, is this very bright, kind of funky colored portrait. And another color that I used is for the hair. I have this very nice, this is my favorite pencil, it's the shortest out of all of them, you can probably tell. I use this to kind of lay down my blacks. And that is because I like to mix my blacks just like I'm mixing my skin tones. I really enjoy mixing dark blues with a brown, and that's going to be the only brown that I really use in this portrait. And of course you can use browns to kind of tone down your colors. I just like having the vibrancy of mixing my browns. So for the hair, I believe I used, going back to my chart here, I used 19, which is this very cool brown. And layering this on top of that blue is going to give me that kind of interesting black that I got in the final here. Again, I'm not pressing down very hard. Even though this is my black, I'm going to get that darkness once I burnish, because I'm having a very dark brown and a very dark blue layered on top of each other, so that once I burnish that, it's going to get to this level that I have down here. So I'm just layering very lightly with everything that I'm putting on here, unless I have the exact color with the pencil for what I need. Then I can lay down the colors a little bit darker. So now for this next part, to get to this strip of her face, I'm going to go on to my next colors, which are a lot of oranges and yellows. That's going to warm up her face. So I have 13, 52, and I like being able to see all the colors, especially when I'm choosing my colors, so that I can use my viewfinder, be like, oh, I need to add purple to this mix, look at everything I have laid out in front of me and find that perfect purple. So I also have the 28 that I already pulled out, and my 37. I love that these pencils are labeled. I know a lot of colored pencils are, but I find it so easy to find the colors. I can easily just put down a 3-digit number and find them across my stack here. What color am I still looking for? 37? There it is. Alright. So I already added down that blue that I kind of showed you that I mixed with the brown. So I'm going to go in with these 3 warm colors. So this is going to be kind of my mother color, or the main color of the skin tone. Everything else on here is going to be kind of what shows through underneath. That's going to be mixing with these. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start with this orange because that's what I see a lot of. I do typically start lightest to darkest, but I really enjoy this highlight on her nose here where it is very orange. So I can go in pretty dark. I'm not going to go in dark right away. I like to start very light, but I can go in and kind of lay down that color exactly as it is. And I'm not worrying about my highlights. There is a bright white on the top of that highlight here. I'm going to ignore that. All the highlights and these bright whites, I'm going to wait till the end, which I know is kind of weird, especially when you're working with colored pencils, but I have a very fun tool which I'm very excited to show you. I want to pull it out now, but I'm going to wait. So I'm going to start filling in these oranges that I see, mixing optically with what I have on there. That's going to create a closer shade to what we have. And while I'm adding this in, if I get too orange, that's going to be when I start adding a third color to my color mixtures. So if I get too orange, I already have this perfect light blue that I have in here. I can go in very lightly over top and tone it down. And the fun part about this is all skin tone is some variation of a brown in different value, kind of different types of colors. And I'm sure most of you know that if you mix a bunch of colors, there's a good chance that you're going to get brown. So the more colors that you add to one particular spot, the more neutral that color is going to be. So going back with my orange here, I'm kind of avoiding my shadows because I want those to be kind of cooler. I don't want too much of this orange in my shadow areas. And again, very light pressure. I like to add, or build up, I mean, to those darker values. And you don't really have to press down because we're going to burnish later, but if you need to kind of see where you're blocking things out, that's kind of useful. So again, I'm kind of avoiding this highlight, but that is because I want to make sure that this is more pink than orange. So I'm going in with my pink now, and I'm going to show you, for example, if I go in and I lay this in too dark to the point where it no longer looks like a highlight, maybe a little bit more, I can go in with this super fun eraser. This is the Vanish 4-in-1 eraser, and I was curious what the 4-in-1 is. And it is because it's such a fun, weird, kind of lovely consistency that's supposed to be a good combination of gum eraser, kneaded eraser, those hard rubber erasers, vinyl erasers. It's 4 of those different kinds of erasers in one, where it has a kind of sturdy surface, but it's also very flexible. So it's a fun combination of all 4 of those different erasers. And I use this to kind of pick up and lighten some areas. So over here on her cheek where I kind of obliterated that highlight, I just go in and very lightly tap out those colors to bring out that lightness again. You can also do this is what I kind of mentioned earlier, if you wax out an area where you kind of burnished too far before you get to that part when you're done adding colors. You can use this to kind of take off that top layer so you can continue building up that surface. Put that back in there. Yes, got another question?
Yes. Ralph on YouTube wants to know what type of pencil sharpener do you suggest for pencils?
Yes, so I actually have this Soho pencil sharpener. I absolutely love this because it has 3 different sharpening options. For these Cezanne pencils, you have the normal sharpening, but you also have that super pointy, long tipped,
It's a long point.
Yeah, long point sharpener. But there's also one in the middle that's for your big boys, which I have a Jumbo Jet pencil here. This works perfectly in that bigger central section. Goodness. And it sharpens super well. And it has the bottom where you can sharpen. It also has the top where you can empty it out. And it's see-through so you can see how much is in there so that you know when to empty it. I don't know, I've come across sharpeners where I can't see how much is in there and I'm like, why can't I sharpen it anymore? Okay, but yeah, I love these and they come in different colors. So if you want a fun color, they got fun colors. Alright, and I am going back in with a few of my previous colors in case I want to go back and blend more. Adding more of that yellow in some sections. I'm just building up as many colors as I can so I get to a area that kind of looks like this. So I'll go in and add in some shadows. Just making sure I blend optically as many colors as I can get. I like having kind of like a secret rainbow inside of my skin tones. Using these blues very lightly, because this is a dark blue, to tone down those cool shadows. Now I'm going to say that is close enough because I do want to make sure I show you as much as possible. So it should end up similar to this, where it's still pretty vibrant, but I'm going to start going in with my colorless blender. And I do like to make sure I clean it off first, just in case, because I know I've been using this before. That's what this extra sheet is for. I just kind of roll it around, get that excess pigment off of there. You want to do this especially if you're going for a very light section, just in case. Even if it looks clean, I just like to be super extra careful. And this is kind of where like the fun part comes in. I've layered all of these colors. This is where you see the true mixture that you've created. So I'm going to go in with this colorless blender. I like going in small circles. Make sure I go in small sections. So like this edge of the nose, I want to make sure I kind of blend the colors on the outside line and then on the inside, so that I still have that nice crisp edge of the nose. And as I'm burnishing this and kind of blending all of these colors together, and I start seeing the colors that I've created, you are still able to add color on top of this. Not a lot, because once it's burnished, it can start to wax out, but you can still adjust the color without creating or adding too much extra pigment. So I've gotten this really nice base that I can then adjust by adding colors on top.
And when you're burnishing, how hard are you pressing?
I'm not pressing too hard. I don't want to create divots in the paper. And I'm kind of using it at like this angle here. You don't have to press too hard to get that burnishing and that blending. If you want like very like distinct marks as you're burnishing, you can go in very hard, but it's not going to create too much of a difference as going in and putting it in very lightly. So the pressure isn't too much of an issue. What are you doing over there, Katie?
Sorry. Trying to make sure all the things work and push the wrong one.
Mom life.
Yeah. Can you tell I have a toddler? Who's apparently been messing with the volume button.
Alright, and I do also want to be careful with the direction in which I am coloring this in, because you can sometimes move pigment around and you don't want to see lines. So I kind of picked up some blue from the outside of my nose and brought it in. I'm just going to kind of blend it in with my burnisher or my colorless blender as much as possible. I am going to add a nice highlight to that area, so I'm not too worried about it. But I love seeing the colors appear as I start blending them together.
It is like a magic trick. I'm just
Isn't
like,
it?
It's
You're watching.
Yeah.
And like personally, I've always thought you had to push really hard with the burnisher, so that was my own
Same.
personal question.
No, it's actually, you actually don't need too much pressure, and it's great because I'm going to show this next. This is also super great for, you don't need a lot of pressure. It's great if you have like mobility issues or bad wrist. This is my favorite tool that I have discovered almost ever. I don't know why I love it so much. But it is a rechargeable electric eraser. It comes with a little cord here. I did charge it just in case, but it has a very long battery power. It lasts very long. I have a larger eraser in here right now, even though it's kind of tiny. It comes with even tinier erasers and some replacements. I love these teeny tiny ones for those highlights in the eyes, or just those teeny tiny little crevices, those highlights on the lip. But I'm gonna hold on to the one that I have here. I also like that you can put the cap on the end. I love markers that used to do that. Another question?
We did have a question about, again with the watercolor pencils, if you don't want to add water to them, will the blender work with them?
I would say so. Especially if you're not using water, I think it's still gonna blend those colored pencils, and you'll get very similar effect to the normal colored pencils. Again, I can test that out just to make sure for you. I love playing with these colored pencils, especially the watercolor ones, so I'll probably do a little test for you. But this eraser is super easy. You just press the button and it starts spinning, so you don't have to move your wrist at all. You can just get it going. Let me make sure I know where my highlights are. And then wherever that highlight is, press down, and you got that nice little highlight. It's so nice to add those in at the end. That way you don't have to work around where those highlights are. You can tap in very lightly, and I find the weird machine noise it makes very calming. You can also go in and lighten up an area if you want to completely redo your shading in that area, or if you want to obliterate a color that you added that you didn't like where it was. Super easy, goes straight down to the paper, especially with this colored pencil and paper combination. So, actually, I'm going to keep playing with it because I love it. Add some of that highlight to the chin. And this is super burnished here. I can show you just how much that takes off. It's so nice. Alright, so I want to make sure I go over to my other beautiful lady here.
It's like blasphemy watching you do that.
I'm so sorry. Did you not want me to erase her chin? I have a finished one. It's okay. So I'm going to go back to my nice chart here, figure out the colors I used for my other lady, because I do want to make sure that I'm using different colors. Even though it's in the same environment and there's still similar shadows and light, they have different skin tones and different undertones. So I want to make sure that I choose a whole new collection of colors for this other beautiful lady here. So let me pull out those. And I have a really nice light yellow on the end here. And then pink and orange. So I started off with her with quite a few more colors than I started off. Oh, I love these colors together. Look at these. With more colors on her than I did with my other lady here. And that is because, if we look at our reference photo here, you know how I said we needed colors for each different variation of color on her face. On this lady here, we had one skin tone, different color for the lips, and then the eyes, the eyebrows, the hair, those are all very similar colors. They were all black or brown. So for her, I have blue eyes, the skin tone, the lips are slightly different. I also had a different eyebrow and hair color. So I had quite a few more colors to add to my selection to start off with. Also, I love this blue highlight on their body here. I had a lot of fun with this final image, adding all that fun straight blue to their shoulder there. So let's jump into our other lady here. And starting with these, I'm going to start lightest to darkest. So starting with that bright yellow. Again, this is so light you probably won't even see it. But I always like to lay down this base color, especially if I'm laying something on top. It's going to blend once I burnish.
Michaela,
yes.
Is there ever a time when you would leave areas unburnished?
Yes. So for the hair, I wanted the hair to look different. So on this lady on the right here, I wanted the hair to look different than the skin. So I wanted the skin to look smoother than the hair. So the hair I actually did not burnish because I wanted that texture to look a little bit different. So if you want there to be a textural difference between two things, I think that would be a good use of not burnishing.
Thank you.
And then for her skin tone, she's very cool toned, especially in comparison to, where'd my other drawing go? Over here. That's why I chose the top and bottom reference photos, is I kind of wanted to show the difference in skin tone between these two ladies and these two ladies. So for this one, the one on the right here, she has a very warm pink skin tone, where on the left she has very kind of yellowy skin tone. So you can kind of see what colors you want to pick, especially if you have a comparison between another model. And then up here, she has a lot cooler of a skin tone than she does. And I know it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm looking at the highlights. So over here, she has very purple highlight, where on here she has very orange highlight. And overall, I have purple, a little bit of like a red-orange, and then a darker purple. And then over here I have like a yellow, an orange, and a red. So that kind of leans more to a warm, more of a cool. If you want to pick your colors that way, that's a good way to tell. Alright, let's go ahead and add more to this lady here. Now, again, I'm making sure I add very light pressure when I add my colors. And I'm making sure that a lot of the colors I choose are lightly valued, because once I start burnishing a lighter skin tone, those colors are going to start popping. You want to make sure that the colors you're using are light in value, especially when you start burnishing. Those colors are going to come through still light. And the eraser has also been very helpful for this lighter skin lady, because if you add too much of a color, or if it's the wrong color, that eraser is perfect to bring that back down. So again, I'm just adding very lightly. I'll go ahead and jump into my next set of colors. So I added all of these colors up here. This dark turquoise, I use that for her eyes. The rest of this is the base colors that I put down. I'm moving into darker kind of complementary colors because those first colors I laid down are very close to the final color that I wanted to get. So those colors, which were that purple, oh, I already have that purple, and a dark red, and that blue for black, and for her eye. Yes? Another question?
Can you explain what you mean by the word burnished?
Yes. So I'm basically just blending my colors, and burnishing is basically smoothing down the surface. So I'm blending and smoothing down the surface. If you don't want to burnish, you don't have to use the blender. You can still blend without burnishing. It just takes a little bit more time, I feel like. But yes, does that answer? Okay. Alright, so I used this dark blue very sparingly because I don't want to add too much of this super dark color in her nice kind of pastel-y skin tone here. So I really only use this for these very dark shadows inside the eyes and that lash line. I didn't really use it anywhere else because any other shadow, like under the neck here, I wanted to keep that very warm. So I didn't want to use this dark blue. So I'll go in. I had a little bit on the edge of the cheek here. And I am going to get kind of brown in the eyebrows, so I'll add just a little bit to the tip of the eyebrow. Darken those eyes. Again, I used that over here. I love this fun little shadow that she has, where you can see the shadow of her eyelashes on that highlight. I love those tiny little details.
Michaela, in general, how many layers would you say you lay down before you burnish?
I would say a minimum of 3. It really depends because some areas I only have like 2 colors overlapping. Some areas I have like 5 or 6 colors overlapping. And I don't know how many, I kind of broke down what I did into stages. I kind of picked my colors as I went, so it's kind of interesting going back and already having a picked color scheme. Sorry, what, what was the question again?
How many layers you usually use?
Okay, yeah. So it really depends on the area that I am drawing, and the subject.
And then would you be able to use a blending stump instead of a colorless blender pencil?
I have not tried that. I'm not a huge fan of them. I'd imagine you could. I don't think you would get quite a vibrant outcome. I think it would get kind of muddy. But if you want to try it out, let me know what you think. Yes.
I did actually have a previous show where we went through blending
Yes.
all sorts of things because we have a couple people on YouTube asking about that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
we can pop in a link for that show.
Definitely. And definitely check it out because it's very fun and interesting. She did like 10 plus different options where she blended a sphere with each different option that you can choose. Like even ones that you probably wouldn't even think of. It's pretty great. All right, so I'm just going to jump to the fun part of burnishing. So this, even though it doesn't really look like it, since I have a lot of highlight and very light tones in this area, this is burnished. So I'm going to go up to where I know there's quite a few colors and burnish up here. I'm just going to say blend. It is a colorless blender. And this is also Cezanne. I don't know if I mentioned that. This is the same brand as my colored pencils. They work very well together. And Cezanne is a wax-based colored pencil. They do make oil-based, they make hybrids, not Cezanne in particular, but they do have other different variations of colored pencil out there. And I did want to show that once you blend your colors, you can kind of adjust the color on top. Which, let me kind of show you this shadow here. This is where you want to be very careful, this high contrast area when you are blending. You want to make sure, just like I said on the nose for the other woman, is make sure you kind of are careful. Do the light area or the dark area first. I did the dark area first, so I'm going to clean off my blender on my extra sheet here. And then I'll go in and kind of blend around that on the other side. Alright, and then if I wanted to adjust the colors on top, which from my chart here are the ones on the bottom. These are the colors I went back to besides the brown on the bottom. That's what I blended the blues with to get my blacks. These colors at the bottom here are what I used to kind of adjust what I ended up with after I blended. So if I blended and I got a color or a value that I wasn't happy with, that's where I go back and I add a little bit more to it. So I had some light purple and some greens for this lady on the left here to kind of bring down my reds anywhere I felt like it needed to be a little less red. And then to bring down my yellows and my oranges, I used this nice purple color. I'm just toning down colors with these. You can also change up value by going back to colors that you've already used prior and kind of adding a little bit more darkness by just adding more of that pigment in that one particular spot. So even though colored pencil doesn't really appear like a push and pull material, you definitely can add and subtract. I'm going to draw around my little erasure here, just for Katie.
It's like watching a car wreck.
But just because you burnish, even though you can wax out your color, you can still adjust value and color very slightly at the end. So adding value, I'm going in with a dark valued color and just adding a little bit of pressure like I do with my burnisher. You don't need a lot, but just adding a little bit more pressure to make sure that pigment kind of sits down and adjusting it slightly. You can also go back in with, yes, I used this blue, going back in with more blues to kind of cool down some shadows. Just because you burnish doesn't mean you're done. It doesn't mean you have to be done, I mean. So yeah.
Nola was saying that part of the difficulty she has with colored pencils is knowing what colors to choose to layer. Do you have any tips on that?
Yes. So on your little extra sheet of paper here, if you use your viewfinder and you find a very specific color, you can kind of break it up into different, like you have this orange, you have this pink, you have this dark purple, you have this dark orange. You can use this viewfinder, use this as your final color, and start playing around with mixing. So before you even put anything on your final image, play around with mixing different colors to see how close you can get with just a few colors. So just practice mixing. Find one specific color on the face, practice mixing, figure out what colors you want for that mixture so that you know what colors you need for that specific section. So if you break it down piece by piece, mix off to the side, you can find that color that you're looking for. That way you know what colors that you need. So you can kind of play around off to the side and try different combinations. You'll find that perfect brown. Again, if you add a bunch of colors together, you're going to eventually get a neutral color. So just play around with different combinations off to the side. Use this viewfinder to kind of practice that specific color. But if you break it down that way, it should become a little bit easier. I just kind of enjoy pure chaos, so I just kind of made it up as I went, and I felt pretty confident at the end, but I did practice with a different image beforehand. But yeah, practice your color blending with a different variety of colors and see what you get.
Katie and I were just talking about it might be a good time to break out your color diary if you wanted to practice like specific blends.
Yes.
And then you can record which ones you used for future
Definitely.
references.
100%. We have, what are the different kinds of color diaries we have again?
We have we have an oil and acrylic one, and we have one for technically watercolor, and we were saying we think either would work.
Oh yeah.
But the watercolor might be a better sort of like smooth.
Yeah, better surface probably.
It has gold press texture, but doesn't the other one have a canvas paper texture?
Yeah, I think the watercolor would probably be better. It has more of a gritty texture, especially compared to Bristol, but you're still able to kind of see how the colors mix on a different textured paper for sure. Yes.
How many layers can be applied before you wax out?
It depends. I would say 5 or 6. But if you kind of get to a wax out level, you can pull up that top kind of waxy surface with your eraser and keep going. And once you, because it's kind of hard, it depends also what kind of color you're trying to lay on top. If you're trying to lay like a lighter color or like a medium or similar valued color on top of that, once it is waxed out, you won't really tell. But if you put a darker color on top of that, you'll still kind of have pigment sticking to that waxed out surface. So it's kind of hard to tell, especially it depends on what colors you're using and how hard you're applying each layer.
Does the paper matter?
For layering? I would say a little bit.
Holds a little bit more? Or?
Yeah, I think a toothier paper is going to hold a little bit more. This has a very smooth surface because I did want it to get kind of burnished a little bit faster. Yes?
Along the same lines, does the texture or tooth of the paper change how you would approach layering?
A little bit. So I liked the Bristol because I didn't see a lot of white in between my like color, and I'm using the colorless blender to kind of remove those spots in between. Now I think it would be a very similar process. I would probably just use more of the colorless blender to get rid of those spaces in between. I do know that there are a lot of artists that like that texture in their drawing. So it really depends on what you're going for. Use the materials and the supplies based on the outcome that you want as well. So if you want that nice kind of papery texture showing through your drawing, pick a nice textured paper. If you want a very smooth finish, pick a very smooth paper like the Bristol here. Any other final questions?
I think we're all oohing and awing.
All oohing and eyeing? Alright, I'll add a couple final layers down here. And then we'll finish up for today. We're already pretty close to done. Alright. And I always lay my pencils on top of my reference photo, so I'm just going to roll these across the screen here. Off to the other side. There we go.
Looked really cool.
Okay, I'm glad. Alright, I'll fill in this little erase section here.
I have one more question.
Yes.
Would you say that it's better, in your opinion, to layer to get the color than to use, like, if you have the exact color you need?
I think it is better to layer and optically mix just because it gives it more dimension. Yeah, more of a saturation, a pop.
Life.
Yes. If you have like the perfect brown, for example, for a very specific section, that's going to feel a little flat. Whereas if you have this brown with orange and yellow and purple underneath, it's going to feel a lot more like there's more life to the color.
Real skin doesn't just have one color.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of a lot of stuff going on underneath the surface here, where I know, I'm sure you guys have heard of the color analysis trend that's going on. So using your veins in your hand, if you can see your veins and they're like blue or purple, you're going to have a very cool skin tone, where if you have kind of like a teal or a green, you're going to have a very warm skin tone. And if you see a little bit of both, then you're neutral. I feel like I still haven't figured out what my color analysis is, and I really want to know. I haven't been able to understand their scientific methods of how they pick their colors.
I feel like that's a thing that's come back around. I feel like when I was like real young, like when my mom was
people would get their colors done.
Yeah, people would get their colors done, and then it kind of disappeared. Now it's come back around again.
I feel like I'm summer.
It just feels so arbitrary when I say it.
Yeah.
I have no basis.
I'm a cool summer.
I feel like the only easy one I can figure out is winter, because I think it's like contrasty. Like if your hair and your skin tone are super contrasty, then you're, I don't know how it works. All right, I'm gonna call this done. Are there any final questions for today? No? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Next week.
Say what?
Next week.
Next week. Oh, I'm getting to that. Just a reminder, today's class code is 335, JL335. Please join us next week. We have Emmy on, who's going to be here with Magnani. Super exciting show. Definitely come check that out. But thank you so much for coming. Don't forget to check out our Jerry's Live Facebook group. Make sure you answer that security question. That's very important. Otherwise, you will not get in. And share if you joined along tonight. Or even if you just have something fun to show us. So I love checking that out. But thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you next week. Bye.